Bring in show music, please.
This is Squawk Pod, and I'm CNBC producer Cameron Costa. On today's episode, European leaders gather for a rare White House summit following President Trump's meeting with Russia's Vladimir Putin. Teams from Ukraine, France, Germany, and others touch down in Washington, where Eamon Javers is standing by.
The question for all these leaders today, guys, is if they can craft a NATO-like security guarantees for Ukraine that are enough like NATO to reassure the Ukrainians that they're real, and yet not so much like NATO that they're a non-starter for the Russian side.
What's at stake, and what concessions each party is preparing for? U.S. Ambassador to NATO Matthew Whitaker joins us.
We have to not let the perfect be the enemy of the good, and at some point in time, see if a deal can be had.
And the Trump administration weighing taking a stake in Intel, a debate from both sides on how it will impact industrial policy. And their positions might surprise you.
This is totally flipped. This is like a flipped situation.
Those stories, plus the Winklevoss twins of the social network and then crypto fame, are ready for their big IPO.
I mean, they get screwed out of Facebook.
The next thing will come along.
And they're still 6'5".
It's Monday, August 18th, 2025, and Squawk Pod begins right now.
Stand Becky by in 3, 2, 1. Cue it, please.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Squawk Box right here on CNBC. We're live from the NASDAQ market site in Times Square. I'm Becky Quick, along with Joe Kernan and Andrew Ross Sorkin. And this morning, there is a modest pullback.
How's that alarm clock?
Rough re-entry, don't you know it?
It is. It's like coming back into the atmosphere.
Whoa.
Yep. Friction. And
Comes early, but we're here, and we're happy to be here.
And it's good to have you there.
It's good to be here.
Because it's hard. It's hard work.
Well, that's why they call it work.
Divided by 2 instead of divided by 3. I looked at some of the people I probably would be interviewing today. I'm like, go for it.
It is funny. It is funny. It makes us all appreciate each other.
50%. Is it 50%? I don't know.
It's 50% more.
50% more when it's only 2.
Yeah. But it's good to be here with the whole crew.
We got a lot going on right now. Let's take you through the Squawk Planner. The Fed is in focus this week. Central banker is gathering in Jackson Hole, Wyoming for their annual policy meeting. Steve Leisman will be there. We're going to get a lot from him. But in the meantime, Friday, though, the main event, Fed Chair Jay Powell, scheduled to speak and try to lay out the Fed's new policy framework. Investors will be listening very, very closely for any clues as to whether the Fed is going to cut rates next month. Also, key week for earnings. We're going to get a lot of news from retailers. We're going to hear from Home Depot results. We get that tomorrow, followed by Target and Lowe's on Wednesday, Walmart on Thursday. It's a lighter week, though, for economic data. Tomorrow, we're going to get July housing starts data. Thursday, bringing us weekly jobless claims and new manufacturing numbers from the Philadelphia Fed.
Let's get to Eamon, because Ukraine's president and a group of European leaders are planning to meet President Trump at the White House today, following that meeting with Vladimir Putin in Alaska on Friday. And Eamon Javers, as I mentioned, is with us. Hey, Eamon.
Yeah, good morning to you, Joe. As you say, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy is expected at the White House later today to help chart a path forward in the wake of those failed talks between President Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin in Alaska on Friday. Also present will be leaders of 5 European countries who are part of the so-called coalition of the willing that's backing Ukraine against the Russian invasion. Sources told NBC News over the weekend that President Trump engaged with President Zelenskyy and European leaders by phone early Saturday morning about the U.S. being a party to a potential NATO-like security guarantee for Ukraine as part of a deal struck with Russia. Now, such security guarantees have been a key demand of the Ukrainians as part of any deal to end the fighting. Secretary of State Marco Rubio explained the latest thinking on Meet the Press yesterday.
One of their fundamental demands is that if this war were to end, they have to make sure this never happens again. They don't want to get reinvaded. They don't want to wait 3 or 4 years from now and find another war on their hands. So there's going to have to be some security guarantees as part of it. How that's structured, how that's built, what our role will be, that'll be the kinds of things we'll have to work through.
and take a look at the list of European attendees at the White House today. Alexander Stubb, President of Finland, Friedrich Merz, Chancellor of Germany, Ursula von der Leyen, President of the European Commission, Mark Rutte, NATO Secretary General, and Keir Starmer, Prime Minister of the UK, Giorgia Meloni, the Prime Minister of Italy, Emmanuel Macron of France, a long list of European leaders at the White House today. And the question for all these leaders today, guys, is if they can craft a NATO-like security guarantees for Ukraine that are enough like NATO to reassure the Ukrainians that they're real, and yet not so much like NATO that they're a non-starter for the Russian side. It's going to be a challenge. Back over to you.
Yes, certainly is. And we just got to wait, obviously, to know how it's received. I think there's... I don't know, where do you think the Europeans come down? They've obviously, they're a lot closer to Russia and have a lot more, I guess, that they're concerned about. Do you think they'll be less hesitant to tell Zelenskyy to maybe consider, permanently giving up some territory? I don't know what to think of what they're going to be telling Zelenskyy versus what President Trump is going to be trying to orchestrate.
I mean, I think in broad strokes, you could say that the Europeans generally, Macron in particular, are a little bit more pro-Kyiv and wary of Trump's diplomacy with Vladimir Putin. They don't want the U.S. to get drawn into a situation where we're pushing the Ukrainian side to concede too much. I think the Europeans do want an end to the war, but also want an end on Ukrainian terms. And I think they're wary of another blow-up in the Oval Office, the way we saw earlier this year with Zelenskyy and President Trump and Vice President J.D. Vance. This will be the first time he's been in the Oval Office since that dramatic confrontation. The tone, I think, will be much different today, but we'll see. I mean, President Trump was very respectful coming out of his meeting with Putin, saying, one of the first people I want to talk to is Zelenskyy. And you see in the Zelenskyy tweets over the weekend, he's been very respectful of Trump, saying, he's grateful for Trump, grateful for the American people, trying to be very ginger about this relationship, which really fractured earlier this year, and is so important for both countries.
Eamon, I think the big question, though, is what does Putin give up in this? We've seen the concessions that we've asked for and what President Trump offered just in terms of this. These assurances, these security assurances are certainly different than he'd been offering in the past. But what about Putin? What does he give up? Because he's asking for the entire Donbas region, which the Russians have been trying to take control of militarily since 2014 and have not been successful.
Yeah, and he might want more than that even. You heard Marco Rubio say it in that clip, right? I mean, the idea is if you're Ukraine, any kind of ceasefire can be potentially dangerous in the sense that it could just give the Russians time to rearm, replenish their supplies, their personnel, and mount another offensive in a year or two. And that's not where they want to be. They want to end this thing, and so that's why they want these security guarantees. The question is, what are the security guarantees exactly? Does that mean, NATO forces could be drawn into a war with Russia in a year's time? That's not something I think anyone in NATO wants. It's not something the U.S. certainly wants, and it's potentially very dangerous in terms of global confrontation. So how do you construct security guarantees that don't draw NATO into armed conflict, but are strong enough to deter the Russians, and at the same time don't give the Russians their biggest fear, which is NATO on their doorstep in Ukraine? That's the biggest thing, or one of the biggest things that the Russians have objected to all along, is the encroachment of NATO closer and closer to their frontier. They want to push back and have a buffer zone in Ukraine that's not NATO territory. So that's all just very tricky to work through. That's part of why this war has been so contentious. And that's what the leaders are going to have to contend with today in a drama-filled moment just after the Putin meeting, on the heels of that Zelenskyy breakup at the White House, President Trump orchestrating it all today. It's going to be something to see. And
we've heard so many times that, Putin considers troops like pawns and doesn't, civilians too. It's been a horrific thing to watch over the past couple of years. Does anything matter to him? And people say the economy, I guess, at some point does matter, and that's the only thing he understands. But is that true? When we talk about China, a lot of times we We said, well, they don't even care if the people continue to suffer and, not having everything, not coming up to the living standards of the rest of the world. You wonder whether the CCP worries or really cares about that. And I wonder, is that something that speaks to Putin?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at Russian history, obviously they have an enormous history of economic deprivation and the ability to tolerate that for decades on end. But there is a limit to Russia's economic ability to carry on this war, and the question is, it may be unknowable. I'm sure U.S. intelligence has an estimate. How much longer can Russia really finance this operation, given that the sanctions, they've been very clever in getting around them and continuing economic activity, but at some point they won't be able to have the sort of economic throw weight to continue to carry this on. And where is that point, and what can the U.S. do to hasten that? You look at the war in Afghanistan for the Russians in the 80s, that did had a devastating economic effect on the Soviet Union at that time. Right. A generation of soldiers lost and an economic breaking point for the Soviet Union in Afghanistan. The losses here have been more severe, dramatically more severe than they have been there, and the expense here is much more. So, at some point, you're looking at an economic breaking point. Where that is and what the Russian public is willing to tolerate, what Putin himself is willing to tolerate, all of that's kind of unknowable.
Lavrov with the CCCP shirt on. Confusing, isn't it? There's the CCP,
subtle.
And then there's the so the communists. That's the Cyrillic abbreviation for USSR, I guess. CCC.
Yeah, there is not the CCCP, but some people want to bring it back.
Yeah, exactly. And then you got the other CCP, which is also a thorn in our side sometimes. All right, Eamon Javers, thank you.
Cryptocurrency exchange Gemini's space station filing for its IPO and joining a wave of digital asset firms seeking to tap into the public markets. The company, founded back in 2014 by billionaire twins Cameron and Tyler Winklevoss, it plans to list on the NASDAQ right here under the ticker symbol GEMI. Terms of that offering were not disclosed in a filing that was made public on Friday. The company supports more than 70 cryptocurrencies and operations in more than 60 countries. It also supports stablecoins and issues the Gemini dollar stablecoin. Now, in the 6 months ended June 30th, Gemini reported a net loss of about $280 million on total revenue of about $69 million. That compares with a net loss of $41 million on revenue of $74 million a year ago.
Right.
Those guys.
Are you jealous?
Yeah.
Jealous.
I mean, they get screwed out of Facebook, and it's like that doesn't even.
The next thing will come along.
And they're still 6'5", and they look like that. And now they're both billionaires.
They were billionaires long before this.
Yes.
I know. Well, that's even. You think that helps? You think that makes me feel better?
Envy.
7 deadly sins.
It's a green-headed monster.
It is.
That's right.
Cheese will be next.
Still to come on Squawk Pod, U.S. Ambassador to NATO Matthew Whitaker on the Alaska meeting between President Trump and Vladimir Putin.
What's very clear that came out of Friday is that there is something here to work with. Ukraine's going to have to agree to any deal. It's not going to be a great deal for either side.
Welcome back to Squawk Pod with Joe Kernan, Becky Quick, and Andrew Ross Sorkin.
Up and Andrew, Q.
European leaders, including Ukraine's President Zelenskyy, headed to the White House today. This follows Friday's Alaska summit between President Trump and Russian President Putin. Joining us right now is Matt Whitaker. He's U.S. Ambassador to NATO. Good morning to you. Let's start with just the basics. How do you think Friday's meeting went, and what do you think it portends for today?
Well, good to be with you. I think there's a couple things we need to consider. One is that this is a process. Obviously, everyone wants the fighting to end. President Trump is committed to saving the tens of thousands of people that are dying every single week on the battlefield. But at the same time, it's going to take both sides to come together and to have an agreement. And President Trump is seeing if there is an ability to negotiate, mediate, quite frankly, a resolution to the war. And I think Secretary Rubio said it best yesterday. He said that there was progress made, that they felt there was enough progress to take it to the next step, which is this meeting today. And we'll see how the European leaders, together with President Zelenskyy, respond to what was proposed by President Putin.
Mr. Ambassador, the thing that I think that some people can't figure out is, the meeting was cut short, or at least shorter than people had anticipated. And some people, you could take it two ways. Either everything worked out perfectly, super quickly, and so they ended the meeting quickly and said, let's stop wasting time, we're just going to go to it, or it didn't work out the way it was supposed to. Which was it?
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously, we wouldn't be taking this next step if it didn't go as hoped. I mean, obviously, I think all indications that progress was made, that there is a proposal that has come from Russia that was briefed on the plane ride back by President Trump to both President Zelenskyy and the European leaders. And now they're convening today to meet about it and to talk about it and to find out if there's a counter proposal, if there is something to work with here. I mean, again, it's a process. And I think President Trump has been pretty clear that he is trying to create the conditions to bring not only Russia to the table, and I think he's the only one that could bring Russia to the table, but also see if there's a deal to be made. And that's,
but what do you
I think this is the next step.
Look, a critique is no ceasefire, that was supposed to be a precondition going into the meeting that didn't happen. Mm-hmm. It sounds to me like ultimately Ukraine's going to give up Crimea and Putin's going to get what he wants in terms of Ukraine not becoming part of NATO. Then you say to yourself, well, why does Putin not want him to become part of NATO? Because maybe he wants to keep going later. What do you think of that?
Well, as you know, NATO is the strongest military alliance ever on the planet. So, I mean, obviously, that is a strong incentive, and Ukraine does want to be in NATO. All 32 members would have to agree to that ascension if that were to happen. But, what's very clear that came out of Friday is that there is something here to work with. Ukraine's going to have to agree to any deal. It's not going to be a great deal for either side. Russia is not going to get everything they want. Ukraine's not going to get everything they want. But at the same time, we're going to end the tens of thousands of soldiers and, quite frankly, civilians that are dying every week in Ukraine. I mean, it is just catastrophic, the humanity. And so I think, we have to not let the perfect be the enemy of the good. And at some point in time, see if a deal can be had. And I think that's what President Trump has done. I mean, he is a peacemaker. He's made 6 peace deals, most recently between Thailand and Cambodia. And so, plus Armenia and Azerbaijan, there's a series of peace deals that he concluded, brought to the finish line. And I think that gives him the space here to see if a deal can be made in this conflict.
Do you think Ukraine should become part of NATO?
Well, I think it takes all 32 members. We haven't taken the sense of the 32 members as to whether Ukraine should be part of NATO. Obviously, there is a process. They're not part of the EU either. And that process, they would have to meet certain things, including corruption has to be rooted out, and other political issues have to be considered. But, that obviously is a question for another day. And ultimately, I'm President Trump's representative at NATO. And so the decision of whether or not the United States supports that is up to President Trump.
Clearly, Europe has been much more supportive of Ukraine and Zelenskyy in many ways, or in some ways, I don't want to say more supportive, because you could argue we've been more supportive in terms of just total dollars. But there is a sense, if you read some of the newspapers in Europe, for example, about their frustration with the United States in these circumstances, and think that we are leaving Zelenskyy out there and putting him in a corner. Do you agree with that?
That is not the current situation on the ground. I obviously live and work in Europe currently, even though I'm in Washington, D.C. for these meetings today. I really think that the Europeans know that the United States has to be at the table. They have begged us not to walk away. That is their biggest concern, is that President Trump walks away from this peace process. And the United States is the only country, including President Trump's the only person that can bring Vladimir Putin to the table, that has the cards to play, to continue to exert leverage. Obviously the sanctions and tariffs on India were significant and were felt. And those types of things can continue to be rolled out if there is an unwillingness to continue down the path to peace. But I just think the Europeans know that the United States is their best ally, their best friend. You know, we have great relationships within NATO and within Europe, and so they know the United States needs to be at the table, and they want us there.
Mr. Ambassador, some of the individuals that, I don't know what you'd characterize them as, maybe almost Putin enablers or a certain fringe element of I guess it's even the Republican Party that said that the reason Putin can say he was justified in the initial move on Ukraine was because he was concerned that NATO would be right on his doorstep, and that should have never been even broached. And so if there is a security guarantee that's not NATO, but it's like NATO light or something, how do you thread that needle to where it's not NATO, which Putin definitely doesn't want, but it still essentially does the same thing as the United States guaranteeing the Ukrainian security? I don't know how you do. You call it something different, but it's the same thing?
Well, ultimately, it's an alliance. It's a coalition is what NATO is, and anything that would be a security guarantee for Ukraine would be some form of a coalition or an alliance for that purpose, and then you would, draft up some sort of a governing document. I think we're a long way from hanging some flesh on that. There's been a coalition of the willing that has been meeting, led by the UK and Germany, and I've sat in some of those meetings because many of them have been at NATO headquarters in Brussels, and certainly there is a desire to make sure that when this war ends, when there is a peace, that it's a lasting peace, an enduring peace. And the only way they can do that is to make sure that Russia doesn't continue to press on the offensive ever again. And the only way you do that is make sure that Ukraine is very strong. Obviously, they've done an admirable, brave job defending themselves and fighting. But at the same time, they're facing just a war machine in Russia, and a bigger economy, a bigger population, and the economics and the numbers are just difficult long term if you really play it out over a decade, which nobody wants this to continue. And so, security guarantees, participation of Europe, a bearing of the burden of Europe, which is what we started when we got together in The Hague a couple months ago, and Europe and Canada committed to 5% GDP for their collective defense and their individual defense. And I think that set the framework and the path to what could happen in Ukraine with Ukraine's participation. But I think right now it's very clear that any security guarantee would be outside of the NATO security framework.
Ambassador, you're completely right. I think those are all the relevant questions and points, but the big issue is, how do we trust Putin, who has made these promises in the past? He was the aggressor in this position. He signed all of these truces, including the Ukraine sovereignty truce back in 1994 and the one for Crimea in 2014. Same person. He goes back on his word time and time again, and I think that's why we probably need something with a lot of teeth to protect whatever is agreed to.
I think there's no doubt about that. Obviously, President Reagan said it best: we trust but verify. And
right.
In this case, it's going to have to make sure that Ukraine is strong enough, together with this coalition of the willing and an Article 5-like commitment from Europe, to be there on the ground and to protect Europe together with the Ukrainians. And that's, I think, what's going to be formed up here.
Okay, Ambassador, I want to thank you for joining us. We wish you all a lot of luck today, and look forward to seeing the progress that comes out of today's meeting. Thank you.
All right. See you again soon.
Coming up on Squawk Pod, what a government stake in Intel would mean for the global economy. A debate with former Trump policy advisor Stephen Moore.
With respect to making America #1 in artificial intelligence, I want the government to stay as far away as possible, just like they did in the internet age.
And former Biden Treasury official Natasha Sarin.
The idea of industrial policy in targeted areas where we're concerned about national security actually seems like quite good policy to me.
This is Squawk Pod.
You're watching Squawk Box right here on CNBC. I'm Andrew Ross Sorkin, along with Joe Kernan and Becky Quick. Got a lot of stories to talk about this morning. And central bankers headed to Jackson Hole later this week. Fed Chair Jay Powell scheduled to speak and lay out the Fed's new policy framework on Friday, and we're going to keep our eyes on all of that. This will be, and I was thinking, the September decision could be his last major decision before the president nominates or names whoever the successor would be.
Yeah.
And therefore, before we effectively have a shadow Fed chair, we talk about the potential of a shadow Fed chair, but if he lowers rates, does that change the kind of person that he would want? If he doesn't do anything, does that mean he needs an even harder charging kind of person to go lower the rates for him? So does what Jay Powell says later this week not just affect the markets, but does it affect the kind of person that Trump may be more inclined or not to name?
That's an interesting question. There's a huge piece in Barron's where they wrote up how important this speech is, maybe the most important of Powell's career, because he's got a Fed that's under siege, pressure from the president, which way he's going to go on this. The numbers have changed significantly since the last time we heard from him. Not an easy line to walk.
The numbers for that month changed, and the 2 previous months changed. Totally changed the whole idea of whether the labor market was healthier or not, as we saw in that chart earlier in the show. I didn't realize it had gone to.
Well, there's a labor market piece, and then there's the inflation piece.
Right.
So it depends what you're focused. You're focused on labor. I think he's probably focused on a combination of both. And some people say the market's come to him, and some people think the market's moved away from him.
I think he's looking too late. I do.
No, that's your perspective.
Because, the PPI is so volatile, and I don't know. And the markets usually are right, but, we're moving into August and September. I'm ready for it always happens. It's
storm season.
Yeah.
A group of Senate Democrats are asking President Trump to reconsider his decision to let NVIDIA and AMD sell AI chips to China in exchange for a 15% cut of revenue. The letter signed by Senators Chuck Schumer, Mark Warner, Jack Reed, Elizabeth Warren, and others. They're requesting details on that arrangement with NVIDIA and AMD by this Friday. We should mention that in those letters, the lawmakers said that President Trump's deal amounted to America negotiating away its competitive edge, critical to national security. They're also warning that selling advanced AI chips to China could strengthen that country's military. Meanwhile, plans for the government to take a stake in Intel could reshape industrial policy as well and national security. Joining us right now, former Trump economic advisor Stephen Moore. He is the co-founder of Unleash Prosperity, also former Biden Treasury Secretary Natasha Sarin. She's a professor at Yale and the president of the Budget Lab. What did I say?
Treasury Secretary.
Oh, official, I should say. Yeah. Could be the Treasury Secretary.
That'd be a big promotion.
Natasha, nice to see you. Congratulations on the elevation.
Yeah.
Steve,
we hardly knew you.
I want to start with you, Steve, though, because I'm curious how you think. You've been a free marketeer. I do not believe you've been somebody who's believed in industrial policy over the years. And here we are in a moment where clearly we are careening towards that world.
Yeah, you're right, Andrew. I'm a big enemy of industrial policy because it's never worked anywhere, anytime. The free market has been much more productive in terms of creating great industries for the United States. And by the way, we have a really good example of a failed industrial policy in the CHIPS Act, which was passed by Joe Biden and was supposed to revive our chips industry. And if anything, it hurt our industry more than it helped it with the subsidies. So I don't want to see. Now, there is and I'm not a national security expert, so I want to be clear about that, but there is some national security portion of this that may justify some of the subsidies that they're talking about. But with respect to making America number one in artificial intelligence, I want the government to stay as far away as possible, just like they did in the internet age, which created, the Magnificent Seven and trillions of dollars of increased wealth for Americans.
Natasha, what do you think of what's happening here?
So, Andrew, we've gotten to talk some about industrial policy and the varying ways in which we might choose to shape the economy and encourage more production in the U.S. of certain types of goods. I actually think I disagree with Stephen in the case of semiconductors and chips. We are talking about pretty significant national security exigencies, and the idea of being reliant on China, an adversary in this way, and them having such control over this particular type of technology seems like deeply concerning. And so I think we still have to kind of learn a bit about what the specifics are with this potential stake in Intel and what it'll look like. But the idea of industrial policy in targeted areas where we're concerned about national security actually seems like quite good policy to me. And indeed I also disagree with Stephen on the CHIPS Act and think that that was an important step in that direction.
But Natasha, isn't this so interesting, this sort of strange bedfellows, everybody reversing, right? So you have, Schumer and Elizabeth Warren and Democrats who historically have actually been to some degree for industrial policy, right? Now, and by the way, for higher taxes generally for corporations and the like, now basically taking issue with the president over what historically, to some degree, they have liked. I mean, there are some people, the critics would look at it like that.
So I think the thing about, and we've talked about this before, but the thing about industrial policy is we really have to be honest about what the trade-offs are. Industrial policy isn't always good. It doesn't always mean economic growth. It doesn't always mean lower costs for consumers. And it doesn't always mean better national security or less reliance on our adversaries. And that's why I think the idea of being sort of forthcoming about those types of trade-offs will lead you to the conclusion that in narrow areas of the economy where these national security exigencies are really quite significant, that's exactly where we should be talking about industrial policy. It's not for manufacturing writ large, it's for chips. And I think that distinction is pretty important, Andrew, and one that sometimes is missed in these debates.
I think it's more interesting.
So can I just add one point?
Hold on, Steve. Hold on. I think it's more. Hold on. I think it's more interesting that our two guests here are fair as foul and foul as fair. I understand the Democrats. Anything Trump does, they're going to write a letter that they hate it. But Natasha is our liberal person, and Steve Moore is our former Trump guy. And Steve Moore. But the Democrats, that's not interesting. Of course they're against it. It's Trump. They would, but Natasha just said you think it's pretty good policy, huh? And Stephen Moore has got his panties are all, or his, you're not allowed to use that anymore. But you're all bunched up in how horrible this is. Couldn't it be, Steve? This is an emergency that we have a foundry here that we need, and I think that's what Natasha's point was. We need to have the ability to manufacture chips here. And that was the idea of both.
That's the CHIPS Act,
That's the CHIPS Act. And this is like a corollary to that. Right. It could be an emergency.
So let me take you all back to a little over 40 years ago when I first came to Washington in 1982. The big issue back then was America needed a national industrial policy, not to defeat China, but you know what country it was we were worried about back then? Japan. And Japan was going to take over the whole world because they had a national industrial policy, we didn't. And then we avoided that route, and we went with the free enterprise system and free markets. And look at the world today. Our stock market is up 40-fold, and theirs has been flat. So countries that have tried industrial policy, look at Europe. Europe is the case study for industrial policy, trying to nurture certain industries.
So you think China's going to bring itself down?
So show me where it's ever worked. Show me where industrial policy has ever worked.
Steve, you think we don't need to worry about China? If that the extension of what you're saying is we don't need to worry about China because they will bring down themselves by overextending themselves and coming up with policies that don't make sense overall.
Let me be clear on this. I do think we have to worry about China. China is a very dangerous country, no question about that. What I'm saying is we will defeat them through our free enterprise system. They have a communist, centrally planned economy. Somebody show me anywhere in the history of the world where that has worked. So, look at you guys are worried about this. Look at we got the Magnificent Seven countries all here in the United States. They're worth more than virtually all the companies in Europe, in China combined.
I think the American economy is great. I think capitalism is so important, and I think we are so competitive vis-a-vis the rest of the world. I also think it's a problem that 90% of rare earths are processed in China, and I think that these are real concerns from a national security perspective, and we need thoughtful policy to address them. So I'm kind of heartened, frankly, to be seeing some of these discussions play out.
Making sense to me, Natasha. I'm on your side.
You're talking national security decisions, and Steve, you pointed out at the top, you're not an expert in national security. I mean, these are where, tough issues and tough decisions come down to it. I don't like picking government winners and losers, but I don't like feeling like we are beholden to one country or another when their interests are directly opposed to ours.
But if we want more industrial production here, we did something very important that every Democrat voted against, which we're allowing businesses to immediately expense their capital purchases, what they can use to develop chips here in the United States. That was a great policy.
I agree. Immediate expensing is a great policy. I disagreed with other aspects of that bill that involve $3 trillion of deficit finance tax cuts to the top disproportionately. But I'm with you. I think that's good and important policy, as I think these conversations about industrial policy in the national security context specifically really are.
Joe's a Democrat.
No, it's just, Andrew's right. There's not a day that goes by when things aren't flipped. Right?
Flipped. This is totally flipped. This is like a flipped situation.
That President Trump. I mean, there's not a. But Moore never flips. He will never flip. You're
God bless you, Stephen, for
I'm
not
not
flipping.
flipped, Joe. This is the CHIPS Act. I'm not flipped. This is what we believe in.
I got a question for you, Steve. You obviously spent time with the president. You were in the White House with him, showing on the easel some of the numbers. Have you had this conversation with him directly?
You mean on this particular issue?
Yeah.
With respect to the chips, no, but I did tell him that the incomes have been way up so far in his first 5 months in office, $1,000 increase, which was about twice as high as we had in 4 years under Biden. So look, I mean, I'm really bullish right now. Look at the headline today, Andrew, of the Wall Street Journal. Earnings are up almost across the board. What would investors not like about this picture?
No, but I can pick 10 things that the president wants to do that you don't like, Moore. I can't.
Yeah,
I don't think. I
not
can't 10, think of it.
But maybe 2 or 3.
What do you mean? Some of the main things that you got one thing, expensing. I mean, everything else is like you start twitching almost with tariffs and all these. Almost sacred cows. Sacred cows.
Okay, but then why is it that we have record energy production? Why is we have record earnings?
Well,
why
maybe
is the stock market at all times high? Why are all these policies working?
Yeah, maybe you're wrong. Maybe some of the ones you hate are working, like the Natasha thing.
No, I think it's the four-legged stool. It's more energy production, lower taxes, better trade deals, and deregulation.
Oh, okay. All right, those all sound good.
Thank you, guys.
Okay. Stephen, Natasha, thank you.
Skeptical on some of the trade deals, but maybe we'll come back to that, Joe.
We will talk about all that. You'll both be invited back soon, and we will debate it, I'm sure. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
That's Squawk Pod for today, this Monday. Thank you for starting your week with us. Squawk Box is hosted by Joe Kernan, Becky Quick, and Andrew Ross Sorkin weekday mornings on CNBC, starting at 6 Eastern and going all 3 hours until 9. You can get the best of that TV show in this easy-to-listen-to podcast when you follow Squawk Pod wherever you're listening now. We'll meet you right back here tomorrow. Have a great day.
We are clear. Thanks, guys.